Hey there, folks! Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of Vermont, one of the states in the United States. Vermont is a beautiful state, rich in history, culture, and natural beauty. Let's explore some key aspects of this state. First, let's talk about toponymy, the study of place names. Vermont has a rich history of place names, many of which are derived from the Native American languages. Now, let's move on to history. Vermont played a significant role in the American Revolution, as it was the first state to abolish slavery. Geography-wise, Vermont is known for its beautiful landscapes, including the Green Mountains, which stretch across the state. Demographically, Vermont is a diverse state, with a population of around 625,000 people. Economically, Vermont is known for its dairy farming, maple syrup production, and tourism. Education-wise, Vermont has a strong public school system and several renowned colleges and universities. Transportation-wise, Vermont has a well-maintained highway system and is served by several major airports. Media-wise, Vermont has a thriving local media scene with several newspapers, radio stations, and television stations. Electrical utilities are provided by several companies, ensuring reliable power to the state's residents. Public health is a top priority in Vermont, with a strong focus on preventive care and public health initiatives. Law and government-wise, Vermont has a strong democratic tradition, with a state government that is responsive to the needs of its citizens. Lastly, let's talk about culture and sports. Vermont is known for its vibrant art scene, as well as its love of outdoor sports, including skiing, hiking, and fishing. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Vermont. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to follow and subscribe for more interesting facts about the United States. Vermont 7 is a state in the New England region of the Northeastern United States. It borders Massachusetts to the south, New Hampshire to the east, New York to the west, and the Canadian province of Quebec to the north. According to the most recent U.S. Census estimates, the state has an estimated population of 648,493, making it the second least populated of all U.S. states. It is the nation's sixth smallest state in area. The state's capital of Montpelier is the least populous U.S. state capital. No other U.S. state has a most populous city with fewer residents than Burlington. Native Americans have inhabited the area for about 12,000 years. The competitive tribes of the Algonquian-speaking Abenaki and Iroquoian-speaking Mohawk were active in the area at the time of European encounter. During the 17th century, French colonists claimed the territory as part of New France. Conflict arose when the Kingdom of Great Britain began to settle colonies to the south along the Atlantic coast. France was defeated in 1763 in the Seven Years' War, ceding its territory east of the Mississippi River to Britain. Thereafter, the nearby British 13 colonies disputed the extent of the area called the New Hampshire Grants to the west of the Connecticut River, encompassing present-day Vermont. The provincial government of New York sold land grants to settlers in the region, which conflicted with earlier grants from the government of New Hampshire. The Green Mountain Boys militia protected the interests of the established New Hampshire land grant settlers. Ultimately, a group of settlers with New Hampshire land grant titles established the Vermont Republic in 1777 as an independent state during the American Revolutionary War. The Vermont Republic abolished slavery before any other U.S. state. 910 it was admitted to the Union in 1791 as the 14th state. The geography of the state is marked by the Green Mountains, which run north-south up the middle of the state, separating Lake Champlain and other valley terrain on the west from the Connecticut River Valley that defines much of its eastern border. A majority of its terrain is forested with hardwoods and conifers. The state has warm, humid summers and cold, snowy winters. Vermont's economic activity of $40.6 billion in 2022 is ranked last on the list of U.S. states and territories by GDP, but 21st in GDP per capita. Known for its progressivism, the state was one of the first in the U.S. to recognize same-sex civil unions and marriage, has the highest proportion of renewable electricity generation at 99.9%, and is one of the least religious and least racially or ethnically diverse states. Dairy, forestry, maple syrup, and wine are important sectors in Vermont's agricultural economy. Vermont produces approximately 50% of the nation's maple syrup. Toponymy. The French explorer Samuel de Champlain is sometimes credited with coining the name Vermont, but it does not in fact appear until 1777, when, at the suggestion of Thomas Young, it was adopted as the name of the Vermont Republic, replacing New Connecticut, the name the Republic had borne for the first 6 months of its existence. 11. It represents a French translation of Green Mountain S. The latter first appears in 1772 in the context of the Green Mountain Boys, 12. History Maine article, History of Vermont per colonial Whitturkler of Abenaki couple, 1,700 seconds. The first humans to inhabit what is now Vermont arrived about 11,000 years ago. As the glaciers of the last ice age receded, 13 small groups of hunter-gatherers followed herds of caribou, elk, and mastodon through the grasslands of the Champlain Valley. At that time much of region was mixed tundra. The oldest human artifacts are 11,000-year-old projectile points found along the eastern shore of the saltwater Champlain Sea, 14. This time is known as the Paleo-Indian period. By about 8,000 years ago, the Champlain Sea had become the freshwater Lake Champlain and the climate was more temperate, bringing increased diversity of flora and fauna, 14. This was the beginning of the Archaic period. By about 4,300 years ago, the forests were as they are today. 13 large mammals underwent extinction or migrated north, and the human population became reliant on smaller game and plants. 13 people developed fishing equipment and stone cookware, and practiced woodworking and food storage. 14. They had time for travel, leisure, and performed elaborate ceremonies. 14. Most of the state's territory was occupied by the Abenaki. Southwestern parts were inhabited by the Mohicans and southeastern borderlands by the Pecumtuck and the Pennacook. 15. 16. Self-published source. About 3,000 years ago, the woodland period began. 17. Food was increasingly sourced from domesticated plants, including maize, beans, and squash. Agriculture meant a change from dispersed hunter-gathering towards the establishment of larger settlements. 13. Pottery was made from local clay, and tools were made from chert found along the Winooski River. Canoes were used for fishing and travel. 14. The arrival of European explorers in the 1600s marked the end of the woodland period and the beginning of the Abenaki. At that time, there were about 10,000 indigenous people in what is now Vermont, of whom an estimated 75-90 were killed by European diseases like smallpox. 1819 survivors moved north to New France or assimilated with European settlers. 14. Today, there are no Indian reservations in Vermont. In 2021, 0.2% of live births in Vermont were to American Indian people. 20. Nearly all information about the pre-Columbian era of Vermont is from found artifacts. About 750 prehistoric sites are known in Vermont. 21, but few have been excavated by archaeologists, and those on private property benefit from no legal protection. 22. About 20 native toponyms survive in the state, including Lake Bomoseen, Lake Memphremagog, Missisquoi River, Monadnock Mountain, and Winooski. Colonial, the old Constitution House at Windsor, where the Constitution of Vermont was adopted on July 8, 1777. A C-1775 flag used by the Green Mountain Boys in 1609. Samuel D. Champlain led the first European expedition to Lake Champlain. He named the lake after himself and made the first known map of the area. The land that is now Vermont remained part of New France until 1763. The French had a military presence around Lake Champlain, since it was an important waterway. 23, but they did very little colonization. In 1666, they built Fort St. Anne on Isle La Motte to defend Canada from the Iroquois. It was abandoned by 1670-24. A short-lived settlement existed at Point L'Algonquin, now Windmill Point, Alberg. A village with a church, sawmill, and 50 huts existed at the present site of Swanton. Much of the eastern shore of Lake Champlain was mapped out with seigneuries, but settlers were unwilling to populate the area, possibly because of continual warfare and raiding there. 25. The English also made unsuccessful attempts to colonize the area in the 1600s. In 1724, they built Fort Dummer near what is now Brattleboro, but it remained a small and isolated outpost, often under attack by the Abenaki. 26. With the 1763 Treaty of Paris, France ceded its claims east of the Mississippi River to the Kingdom of Great Britain, making the area more attractive to settlement. 27. At the same time, New England was overcrowded, new land was needed for settlement. 28. The territory west of the Connecticut River was the last unsettled part of New England, and both the province of New Hampshire and the province of New York laid claim to it. 29. In 1749, New Hampshire Governor Benning Wentworth began to auction land in an uncolonized area between Lake Champlain and the Connecticut River. 30. This area became known as the New Hampshire Grants. This westward expansion was started to increase New Hampshire's tax base and claim the timber there, white pine in particular. There were eventually 135 New Hampshire grants. The first of Benning Wentworth's grants included a town named after himself, Bennington. A typical town, it was 6 square miles 16 km2, contained 48 lots, with land set aside for a school, a church, and a town center. 500 acres of the best land was kept by Wentworth for later resale. 32 settlers came from across New England and were obliged to plant and cultivate 5 acres of land within 5 years. Some settlers kept to the agreement and started farms. Others, like Ethan Allen, did not. They wanted to sell the land for profit. 27 Those who purchased New Hampshire grants ran into disagreements with New York, which began selling off the same land as land patents. 33 In 1764, King George III proclaimed the territory to be under the jurisdiction of New York, which meant that the New Hampshire grant landowners did not have legal title. 34 Meanwhile, New York continued selling large tracts of land, many of which overlapped with those already inhabited. 35 The dispute led to Ethan Allen forming the Green Mountain Boys, an illicit militia that attacked New York settlers and speculators through arson and mob violence. 36-37 They eventually repelled the New Yorkers and went on, with Benedict Arnold, to fight in the American Revolutionary War, where they captured Fort Ticonderoga from the British. Sovrieg Timon Articles, Vermont Republic and Constitution of Vermont 1777. The gold leaf dome of the neoclassical Vermont State House Capitol in Montpelier in January 15, 1777, representatives of the New Hampshire grants declared the independence of Vermont. 38 For the first 6 months of its existence, it was called the Republic of New Connecticut. 39 On June 2, 1777, a second convention of 72 delegates met and adopted the name Vermont. This was on the advice of Thomas Young, a mentor of Ethan Allen. He advised them on how to achieve admission into the newly independent United States of America as the 14th state. 39 On July 4, they completed the drafting of the first Constitution of Vermont in effect from 1777 to 1786 at the Windsor Tavern and adopted it on July 8. This was the first written constitution in North America to ban adult slavery, 40 stating that male slaves become free at the age of 21 and females at 18. It provided for universal adult male suffrage and established a public school system. 41 Revolutionary War, Maine Articles, American Revolutionary War, Northern Theater of the American Revolutionary War, and Treaty of Paris 1783. The Battle of Bennington was fought on August 16, 1777. A combined American force under General John Stark attacked the Hessian column at Hoosick, New York, just across the border from Bennington. It killed or captured virtually the entire Hessian detachment. General John Burgoyne never recovered from this loss and eventually surrendered the remainder of the 6,000-man force at Saratoga, New York, on October 17 of that year. 42 The battles of Bennington and Saratoga together are recognized as the turning point in the Revolutionary War because they were the first major defeat of a British army. The anniversary of the battle is celebrated in Vermont as a legal holiday. The Battle of Hubbardton, July 7, 1777 was the only Revolutionary battle within the present boundaries of Vermont. Although the Continental forces suffered defeat, the British forces were damaged to the point that they did not pursue the Americans retreating from Fort Ticonderoga any further. Admission to the Union. Maine Articles. Admission to the Union and list of U.S. states by date of admission to the Union. 1791 Act of Congress admitting Vermont into the Union. Vermont continued to govern itself as a sovereign entity based in the eastern town of Windsor for 14 years. The independent state of Vermont issued its own coinage from 1785 to 1788 and operated a national postal service. 43 Thomas Chittenden was the governor in 1778 to 1789 and in 1790, because the state of New York continued to assert that Vermont was a part of New York, Vermont could not be admitted to the Union under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution until the legislature of New York consented. On March 6, 1790, the legislature made its consent contingent upon a negotiated agreement on the precise boundary between the two states. When commissioners from New York and Vermont met to decide on the boundary, Vermont's negotiators insisted on also settling the property ownership disputes with New Yorkers, rather than leaving that decision to a federal court. 44. The negotiations were successfully concluded in October 1790 with an agreement that Vermont would pay $30,000 to New York to be distributed among New Yorkers who claimed land in Vermont under New York land patents. 45. In January 1791, a convention in Vermont voted 105-46 to petition Congress to become a state in the federal union. Congress acted on February 18, 1791, to admit Vermont to the Union as the 14th state as of March 4, 1791. 2 weeks earlier, on February 4, 1791, Congress had decided to admit Kentucky as the 15th state as of June 1, 1792. 47. Vermont became the first state to enter the Union after the original 13 states. The revised Constitution of 1786, which established a greater separation of powers, continued in effect until 1793, 2 years after Vermont's admission to the Union. Under the Act to Secure Freedom to All Persons Within This State, 48, slavery was officially outlawed by state law on November 25, 1858, less than 3 years before the American Civil War. 49. 50-51. Vermonters provided refuge at several sites for escaped slaves fleeing to Canada as part of the Underground Railroad. 52. Civil War. Main article, Vermont in the American Civil War. Vermont in 1827. The county boundaries have since changed. From the mid-1850s on, some Vermonters became abolitionists, which they had previously worked to contain in the South. Abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens was born in Vermont and later represented a district in Pennsylvania in Congress. He developed as a national leader and later promoted radical Republican goals after the American Civil War. As the Whig Party declined and the Republican Party grew, Vermont supported Republican candidates. In 1860, it voted for Abraham Lincoln, giving him the largest margin of victory of any state. 53. During the American Civil War, Vermont sent 33,288 troops into United States service, of which 5,224, more than 15%, died. 54. The northernmost land action of the war was the St. Albans raid, the robbery of 3 St. Albans banks, perpetrated in October 1864 by Confederate agents. A posse pursued the Confederate raiders into Canada and captured several before having to turn them over to Canadian officials. Canada reimbursed the banks, released, and later rearrested some of the perpetrators. 55-56. Post-Civil War to the present. Demographic changes. Beginning in the mid-19th century, Vermont industries attracted numerous Irish, Scottish, and Italian immigrants, adding to its residents of mostly English and some French-Canadian ancestry. Many of the immigrants migrated to Barrie, where many worked as stonecutters of granite, for which there was a national market. Vermont granite was used in major public buildings throughout the United States. In this period, many Italian and Scottish women operated boarding houses to support their families. Such facilities helped absorb new residents and taught them the new culture. European immigrants peaked in number between 1890 and 1900. Typically, immigrants boarded with people of their own language and ethnicity, but sometimes they boarded with others. 57. Gradually, the new immigrants assimilated into the state. Times of tension aroused divisions. In the early 20th century, some Vermonters were alarmed about the decline of rural areas. People left farming to move to cities, and others seemed unable to fit within society. In addition, there was a wave of immigration by French Canadians, and Protestant Anglo-Americans feared being overtaken by the new immigrants, who added to the Catholic population of Irish and Italians. Based on the colonial past, some Yankee residents considered the French Canadians to have intermarried too frequently with Native Americans. 58. In 1970, the population of Vermont stood at 444,732. By 1980, it had increased by over 65,000 to 511,456. That change, an increase of 15%, was the largest increase in Vermont's population since the days of the Revolutionary War. 59. In 2002, the state of Vermont incorrectly reported that the Abenaki people had migrated north to Quebec by the end of the 17th century. 60. However, in 2011, the state of Vermont designated the Elnu Abenaki tribe and the Nulligan Band of the Coosac Abenaki Nation as state-recognized tribes. In 2012, it recognized the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi and the Cossack traditional band of the Coos Abenaki Nation. In 2016, the state governor proclaimed Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. 61. Vermont has no federally recognized tribes. 62. Political change. Vermont approved women's suffrage decades before it became part of the national constitution. Women were first allowed to vote in the elections of December 18, 1880, when they were granted limited suffrage. They were first allowed to vote in town elections, and later in state legislative races. In 1931, Vermont was the 29th state to pass a eugenics law. Vermont, like other states, sterilized some patients in institutions and persons it had identified through surveys as degenerate or unfit. It nominally had permission from the patients or their guardians, but abuses were documented. 2/3 of the sterilizations were done on women, and poor, unwed mothers were targeted, among others. There is disagreement about how many sterilizations were performed. Most were completed between 1931 and 1941, but such procedures were recorded as late as 1970-58. In 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Reynolds v. Sims required one man, one vote redistricting in all states. It had found that many state legislatures had not redistricted and were dominated by rural interests, years after the development of densely populated and industrial urban areas. In addition, it found that many states had an upper house based on geographical jurisdictions, such as counties. This gave disproportionate power to rural and lightly populated counties. 63. The court ruled there was no basis for such a structure. Major changes in political apportionment took place in Vermont and other affected states. 63. In the 21st century, Vermont increasingly became defined by its progressivism. It was the first state to introduce civil unions in 2000 and the first state to legalize same-sex marriage in 2009, unforced by court challenge or ruling. 64. On January 22, 2018, Vermont became the first state to legalize cannabis for recreational use by legislative action, and the 9th state in the United States to legalize marijuana for medical purposes. This law was signed by Republican Governor Phil Scott. 65. Geographize also, list of counties in Vermont, list of towns in Vermont, and list of mountains of Vermont. Western face of Camel's Hump Mountain, elevation 4,079 feet 1, 243 m66. Fall foliage at Lake Willoughby. Vermont is located in the New England region of the Northeastern United States and comprises 9,614 square miles, 24,900 km2, making it the 45th largest state. It is the only state that does not have any buildings taller than 124 feet 38 m. 67. Land comprises 9,250 square miles, 24,000 km2, and water comprises 365 square miles, 950 km2, making it the 43rd largest in land area and the 40th in total area. It is larger than El Salvador and smaller than Haiti. It is the only landlocked state in New England, and it is the easternmost and the smallest in area of all landlocked states. The Green Mountains in Vermont form a north-south spine running most of the length of the state, slightly west of its center. In the southwest portion of the state are located the Taconic Mountains. 68. In the northwest, near Lake Champlain, is the fertile Champlain Valley. In the south of the valley is Lake Beaumassine. The west bank of the Connecticut River marks the state's eastern border with New Hampshire, though much of the river flows within New Hampshire. 69. 41% of Vermont's land area is part of the Connecticut River's watershed. 70. Lake Champlain, the sixth largest body of fresh water in the United States, separates Vermont from New York in the northwest portion of the state. From north to south, Vermont is 159 miles to 56 km long. Its greatest width, from east to west, is 89 miles 143 km at the Canada-US border. The narrowest width is 37 miles 60 km near the Massachusetts border. The width averages 60.5 miles 97 for km. The state's geographic center is approximately 3 miles 48 km east of Roxbury in Washington County. There are 15 U.S. federal border crossings between Vermont and Canada. Several mountains have timberlines with delicate year-round alpine ecosystems, including Mount Mansfield, the highest mountain in the state, Killington Peak, the second highest, Camel's Hump, the state's third highest, and Mount Abraham, the fifth highest peak. 71 areas in Vermont administered by the National Park Service include the Marsh-Billings Rockefeller National Historical Park in Woodstock and the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. 72. The topography and climate make sections of Vermont subject to large-scale flooding. Incidents include the Great Vermont Flood of 1927, which killed 84 and damaged much of the state's infrastructure. 73. The Flood of 1973, which covered many of the state's roads in the southeast. 74. And Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, which caused substantial damage throughout the state. 75. In response to the 1927 flood, the federal government funded construction of 6 flood control dams in the state, run by the Army Corps of Engineers. 76. These extreme rain and flooding events are expected to intensify with climate change. 77. Climatese also, Climate of New England Penn Climate Types of Vermont, using 1991 to 2020 climate normals. Annual mean temperature for the state is 43 F6C. 78. Vermont has a humid continental climate, with muddy springs, in general a mild early summer, hot Augusts. It has colorful autumns. Vermont's hills reveal red, orange, and on sugar maples gold foliage as cold weather approaches. 79. Winters are colder at higher elevations. 80. It has a Penn climate classification of DFB, a temperate continental climate. 81. The rural northeastern section known as the Northeast Kingdom often averages 10 F5-6C colder than the southern areas of the state during winter. The annual snowfall averages between 60 and 100 inches 1,500 and 2,500 millimeters depending on elevation. Vermont is the 7th coldest state in the country. 82. The highest recorded temperature was 105 F41C at Vernon on July 4, 1911. The lowest recorded temperature was -50 F46C at Bloomfield on December 30, 1933. This is the lowest temperature recorded in New England alongside Big Black River, which recorded a verified -50 F46C in 2009. 83. The agricultural growing season ranges from 120 to 180 days. 84. The United States Department of Agriculture plant hardiness zones for the state range between Zone 3B, no colder than -35 F37C, in the Northeast Kingdom and northern part of the state, and Zone 5B, no colder than -15 F26C, in the southern part of the state. 85. The state receives between 2,200 and 2,400 hours of sunshine annually. New England as a whole receives a range of less than 2,000 hours of sunshine in part of New Hampshire to as much as 2,600 hours of sunshine per year in Connecticut and Rhode Island. 86. Climate Changeman article, Climate Change in Vermont. Climate change in Vermont encompasses the effects of climate change attributed to anthropogenic increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide. The state is already seeing effects of climate change that affect its ecosystems, economy, and public health. According to the state government, rainfall has significantly increased in the last 50 years, storms and flooding have increased, and winters have become warmer and shorter. 87. These changes have affected the winter tourism industry. 88. And caused a decline in critical agricultural and woodland industries like maple sugaring. 89. The state openly acknowledges and is developing programs that respond to global warming. 90. Vermont was one of the first states in the United States to adopt greenhouse gas emissions goals in 2006. Geology, Silurian and Devonian stratigraphy of Vermont. Further information, Geology of New England. There are 5 distinct physiographic regions of Vermont. 91. Categorized by geological and physical attributes, they are the Northeastern Highlands, the Green Mountains, the Taconic Mountains, the Champlain Lowlands, and the Vermont Piedmont. 92. About 500 million years ago, Vermont was part of Laurentia and located in the tropics. 93. The Central and Southern Green Mountain Range include the oldest rocks in Vermont, formed about 1 billion years ago during the first mountain building period, or orogeny. Subsequently, about 400 million years ago, the second mountain building period created green mountain peaks that were 15,000–20,000 feet 4,6006–100 m tall, 3 to 4 times their current height and comparable to the Himalayas. The geological pressures that created those peaks remain evident as the Champlain Thrust, running north-south to the west of the mountains, now the eastern shore of Lake Champlain. It is an example of geological fault thrusting where bedrock is pushed over the newer rock formation. As a result of tectonic formation, Vermont east of the Green Mountains tends to be formed from rocks produced in the Silurian and Devonian periods, and western Vermont mainly from the older Precambrian and Cambrian material. 94. Several large deposits within the state contain granite. 95. The remains of the Chazy Formation can be observed in Isle La Motte, which was one of the first tropical reefs. It is the site of the limestone Fisk Quarry, which contains a collection of ancient marine fossils, such as stromatoporoids, that date to 200 million years ago. At one point, Vermont is believed to have been connected to Africa Pangea. The fossils found and the rock formations found on the coasts in both Africa and America are evidence affirming the Pangea theory. 96, 97, 98 In the past for centuries, Vermont has experienced a few earthquakes, rarely centered under the state. The highest ranked, in 1952, had a Richter magnitude scale 6.0 and was based in Canada. 99. Fauna. The hermit thrush, the state bird of Vermont. The state contains 41 species of reptiles and amphibians, including the spring peeper, 89 species of fish, of which 12 are non-native, 193 species of breeding birds, 58 species of mammals including black bears, eastern chipmunks, coyotes, fishers, red and gray foxes, porcupines, and woodchucks, more than 15,000 insect species including luna moths, and 2,000 higher plant species, plus fungi, algae, and 75 different types of natural communities. 101 Vermont contains one species of venomous snake, the timber rattlesnake, which is confined to a few acres in western Rutland County. 102 Wildlife has suffered because of human development in the state. By the mid-19th century, wild turkeys were eradicated in the state through hunting and habitat destruction. 16 were reintroduced in 1969 and had grown to a flock estimated to number 45,000 in 2009. 103. In 2013, hunters killed 6,968 of these. 104. Since 1970, reduction of farmland has resulted in reduced environment for and resulted in a decline in numbers of various shrubland birds, including the American woodcock, brown thrasher, eastern towhee, willow flycatcher, golden-winged warbler, blue-winged warbler, field sparrow, and Baltimore oriole. 105. Ospreys, whose eggs were previously damaged by DDT, began to reappear in 1998 and by 2010 were no longer endangered in the state. 106 Several species have declined or disappeared from the state, including bats, many of which have been killed by white nose syndrome. 107. The New England cottontail, outcompeted by the eastern cottontail rabbit. 108 And the yellow-banded bumblebee, gone as one of 19 species of bee in decline. 109 110 Invasive species and organisms include the Asian spotted-winged Drosophila, a destroyer of crops. 111 And eastern equine encephalitis virus, whose antibodies were found in moose or deer in each of Vermont's counties. 112 Flora. Vermont is in the temperate broadleaf and mixed forests biome. Much of the state, in particular the Green Mountains, is covered by the conifers and northern hardwoods of the New England Acadian forests. The western border with New York and the area around Lake Champlain lies within the eastern Great Lakes lowland forests. The southwest corner of the state and parts of the Connecticut River are covered by northeastern coastal forests of mixed oak. 113 Invasive wild honeysuckle has been deemed a threat to the state's forests, native species of plants, and wildlife. 114. Many of Vermont's rivers, including the Winooski River, have been subjected to artificial barriers to prevent flooding. 115 Historical population. Climate change appears to be affecting the maple sugar industry. Sugar maples have been subject to stress by acid rain, Asian longhorned beetles, and pear thrips. In 2011, the deer herd had grown too large for the habitat, and many resorted to eating bark to survive the winter, destroying trees in the process. In addition, the sugar maples need a certain period of cold to produce sap for maple syrup. The time to tap these trees has shrunk to 1 week in recent years. The tree may be replaced by the more aggressive Norway maples, in effect forcing the sugar maples to migrate north to Canada. 117. Demographics, population. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the state of Vermont had a population of 643,085 in the 2020 U.S. Census. 118 Vermont was one of two states with fewer people than the District of Columbia. Wyoming was the other. 118 The center of population of Vermont is located in Washington County, in the town of Warren. 119. The influx of domestic migrants in the 1960s to 1980s brought outlooks different than those of the native-born population. As one example, since 1988, Vermont has consistently voted for Democrats in national elections, despite having been the most Republican state in the nation for more than 100 years after the party's founding in the 1850s. 12011 Inward migration to Vermont began to wane during the 2000s and became emigration during the 2010s. This trend reversed in the 2020s, with about 4,500 new residents domestically migrating to the state between 2020 and 2021. 1 to 2 Chittenden County has seen the most rapid population growth, experiencing a 7.5% increase between 2010 and 2020. 1 to 3. In 2018, the top countries of origin for immigrants in Vermont were Canada, Nepal, Jamaica, the Philippines, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. 1, 2, 4 Race and ethnicity. As of 2022, 94% of Vermont's residents identify as racially white, and 92.2% of all residents are white people without Hispanic origin. 1 to 5 making it one of the least diverse states in the U.S., except for Maine. When including French Canadians, the French made up the largest ancestral and ethnic group, with 20% of Vermont's population identify as such, with Irish and English also making up large portions of the populace. Vital statistics: a total of 5,384 babies were born in 2021, a 4.89% increase from 2020. Of those births, 90.3% were non-Hispanic white. The fertility rate was 1.371, a slight increase from 2020. Dialect, main articles, Western New England English and Eastern New England English linguists have identified speech patterns found among Vermonters as belonging to Western New England English, a dialect of New England English, which features full pronunciation of all R sounds, pronouncing horse and horse the same, and pronouncing vowels in father and bother the same, none of which are features traditionally shared in neighboring Eastern New England English. 134 Some rural speakers realize the T as a glottal stop. Mitten sounds like mean and Vermont like Vermin. D135 A dwindling segment of the Vermont population, generally both rural and male, pronounces certain vowels in a distinctive manner. For example, cows with a raised vowel as KZA and ride with a backed, somewhat rounded vowel as D136. Eastern New England English, also found in New Hampshire, Maine, and eastern Massachusetts, was common in eastern Vermont in the mid-20th century and before, but has become rare. 137. This accent drops the R sound in words ending in a farmer sounds like pharma and adds an R sound to some words ending in a vowel. Idea sounds like idea was common. 138. 137. Those characteristics in eastern Vermont appear to have been inherited from West Country. 139 and Scots-Irish ancestors. 140 Vermont is one of 3 states along with Maine and New Hampshire where French is the second most spoken language at home, which is largely due to the state's proximity to the province of Quebec. New England French, a unique dialect spoken in many of Vermont's francophone homes, is derived from Quebec French, in contrast to the Brayton French which predominates in the francophone regions of northern Maine, which were settled primarily by Acadians. Religion, per Public Religion Research Institute's 2022 American Values Survey. E141 Unaffiliated 48 Catholicism 21 Protestantism 19 Jehovah's Witness 4 Unitarian Universalist 2 Mormonism 1 Hinduism 4 Jewish 1. According to the Pew Research Center in 2014, 37% reported no religion, the highest rate of irreligion of all U.S. states, 1 for 2. The Pew Research Center also determined the largest religion was Christianity. 1 for 3 Catholics made up 22% of the population and Protestants were 30%. In contrast with southern U.S. trends, the majority of Protestants are mainline Protestant, dominated by Methodism. The United Methodist Church was the largest mainline Protestant denomination in Vermont, followed by the American Baptist Churches USA and United Church of Christ. Evangelical Protestants were dominated by independent Baptist churches. Major non-Christian religions were Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other faiths. The largest non-Christian religious group outside of irreligion were Unitarians. An estimated 3.1% of the irreligious were atheist, 1 for 3 with the publication of a study by the Public Religion Research Institute in 2020. Christianity spread among Protestantism, Catholicism, and non-mainstream Christians including Mormonism and the Jehovah's Witnesses were approximately 64% of the adult population, 1 for 4. The religiously unaffiliated were determined to be an estimated 30% of the total adult population according to the Public Religion Research Institute. As of 2022, per the Public Religion Research Institute, Vermont became plurality irreligious and consistently ranks as one of the most secular states in the United States, 144 145. The 2022 study estimated 48% of the population were religiously unaffiliated, while 45% were Christian altogether: Catholic, Protestant, Mormon, and Jehovah's Witness. The Association of Religion Data Archives reported that in 2020, the religiously affiliated population were primarily Christian. The single largest Christian denominations were the following: the Catholic Church 1 to 4, 208, United Church of Christ 11, 882, and the United Methodist Church 9, 652. Non-denominational Protestants numbered 29, 830, 1 for 6. Among the largest Christian denominations at this study, Catholics had an adherence rate of 208.7 per 1,000 people, the United Church of Christ 18.48 per 1,000 people, and United Methodists 15.01 per 1,000 people, 1 for 7. ARDA's 2020 membership tabulations reflected the Pew Research Center's 2014 study, where 21% of the population attended religious services weekly, 32% once or twice a month, and 47% seldom never, 1 for 2. In a 2018 research article by the National Christian Foundation, non-church-going Christians nationwide did not attend religious services, often through practicing the faith in other ways, not finding a house of worship they liked, disliking sermons, and feeling unwelcomed, and logistics, 1 for 8. In 2021, Vermont had a total employment of 239,758, and the total employer establishments were 2,696, 149 as of 2022. Vermont's gross regional domestic product (GDP) was $40.6 billion, making it the smallest among U.S. states. Its per capita GDP was $63,206, ranking it 21st among the states, 150 in 2008. Components of GDP were 15115 to government $3 billion, 13 for real estate, rental, and leasing $2.6 billion, 11, 6. Durable goods manufacturing $2.2 billion, 9, 6. Healthcare and social assistance $2.1 billion, 9, 4. Retail trade $1.9 billion, 8, for finance and insurance $1.3 billion, 5, 9. Construction $1.2 billion, 5, 5. Professional and technical services $1.2 billion, 5, 5. Wholesale trade $1.1 billion, 5, 1. Accommodations and food services $1 billion, 4, 5. Information $958 million, 4, 2. Non-durable goods manufacturing $711 million, 3, 1. Other services $563 million, 2, 4. Utilities $553 million, 2, 4. Educational services $478 million, 2, 1. Transportation and warehousing $484 million, 2, 1. Administrative and waste services $436 million, 1. 9. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting $375 million, 1. 6. Arts, entertainment, and recreation $194 million, 8. Mining $100 million, 4. Management of companies $35 million, 2. As of 2019, Canada was Vermont's largest foreign trade partner, followed by Taiwan. Quebec received 75% of the state's exports to Canada, 153 in 2022. 7,457 new businesses were registered in Vermont, 154. Retail sales reached $10.8 billion in 2017, according to U.S. Census Bureau data, 150. Personal income. See also, Vermont locations by per capita income. In 2021, the state had a median household income of $67,674, with approximately 10.3% of the population at or below the poverty line, 1 for 9. The median wage in the state was $22.75 hourly or $47,320 annually in 2002. In 2007, about 80% of the 68,000 Vermonters who qualify for food stamps received them. 156. 40% of seniors 75 years or older live on annual incomes of $21,660 or less. 157. In 2011, 15.2% of Vermonters received food stamps. This compares to 14.8% nationally. 158. In 2011, 91,000 seniors received an annual average of $14,000 from Social Security. This was 59% of the average senior's income. This contributed $1.7 billion to the state's economy. 159. Agriculture. Fall foliage seen from Hogback Mountain, Wilmington as of 2022. Agriculture, along with forestry and other animal industry, contributed 0.45% of the state's gross domestic product. 160. As of May 2022, about 0.16% of the state's working population was engaged in agriculture jobs. 161. Dairy farming. Maine article, Vermont Dairy Industry cidery farming remains a primary source of agricultural income. In the second half of the 20th century, developers had plans to build condos and houses on what was relatively inexpensive open land. Vermont's government responded with a series of laws controlling development to prevent the decline of Vermont's dairy industry. This proved ineffective, as the number of Vermont dairy farms has declined nearly 95% from the 11,206 dairy farms operating in 1947. As of December 2021, the state had 568 dairy farms, a decline from 658 in 2019, 1,138 in 2006, and fewer than 1,500 in 2003. The number of dairy farms has been diminishing by roughly 10% annually. 164 dairy farms control 80% of open land. 163 in 2021, 28.5%. 162 of the state's dairy farms were certified organic. 162. The number of cattle in Vermont had declined by 40%. However, milk production has doubled in the same period due to tripling the production per cow. 165. While milk production rose, Vermont's market share declined. Within a group of states supplying the Boston and New York City markets called Federal Order Class I, 166, Vermont was third in market share, with 10.6%. New York has 44.9% and Pennsylvania has 32.9%. 167. In 2007, dairy farmers received a record $23.6 for 100 pounds 45 gg 11.63 gallons at 203 gallon of milk. This dropped in 2008 to $17 1.46 gallon. 168. The average dairy farm produced 1.3 million pounds of milk annually in 2008. 169. The dairy barn remains characteristic of Vermont, but the 95% decrease in dairy farms between 1947 and 2021 means that preservation of dairy barns has increasingly become a matter of preserving historic legacy rather than meeting a basic need of an agricultural economy. The Vermont Barn Census, organized in 2009 by educational and nonprofit state and local historic preservation programs, has worked to record the number, condition, and features of barns throughout Vermont. 170. A significant amount of milk is shipped into the Boston market. Therefore, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts certifies that Vermont farms meet Massachusetts sanitary standards. Without this certification, a farmer may not sell milk for distribution into the bulk market. 171. In 2019, 2/3 of all milk in New England was produced by Vermont dairies. 163. Forestry. Forestry has always been a staple to the economy, comprising 1% of the total gross state output and 9% of total manufacturing as of 2013. 172. In 2007, Windham County contained the largest concentration of kilns for drying lumber east of the Mississippi River. The decline of farms has resulted in a regrowth of Vermont's forests due to ecological succession. Today, most of Vermont's forests are secondary. The state and nonprofit organizations are actively encouraging regrowth and careful forest management. Over 78% of the land area of the state is forested compared to only 37% in the 1880s, when sheep farming was at its peak and large amounts of acreage were cleared for grazing. 173. Over 85% of that area is non-industrial, private forest land owned by individuals or families. In 2013, 73,054 million cubic feet 2.068 million cubic meters of wood was harvested in Vermont. 174. A large amount of Vermont forest products are exports, with 21,504 million feet 6.554109 meters being shipped overseas, plus an additional 16,384 million cubic feet 4.639 million cubic meters to Canada. 174. Most of it was processed within the state. In this century, the manufacture of wood products has fallen by almost half. The annual net growth has been estimated at 172,810 million cubic feet 4.893 million cubic meters. 174. The USDA estimates that 8,584 billion cubic feet 2.431 billion cubic meters remain in the state. 174. Forest products also add to carbon sequestration, since lumber and timber used in houses and furniture hold carbon for long periods of time, while the trees that were removed are replaced over time with new growing stock. 175. In 2017, the price of wood products had either plummeted or remained the same when compared to previous decades, which meant there was cause for concern with jobs in the industry. For example, in 1994, the price of 1,000 board feet was $300, the same as it was in 2017. The price of wood chips has halved in the same time frame. In 1980, the price for a cord of wood was $50. In 2017, $25. For lack of demand, Vermont's forests are growing twice as fast as they are being cut. 176. Authoress of 2022, Vermont was the leading producer of maple syrup in the United States at 2,550,000 US gallons 9,700,000, representing 50.7% of the nation's total production. 177. In 2021, its production value totaled $56.0 million at 32,000 gallon. 178. There were about 2,000 maple products producers in 2010. 179. The wine industry in Vermont started in 1985. As of 2007, there were 14 wineries. 180. As of 2020, apple growing is the third largest contributor to the state's agricultural economy after dairy and maple syrup. Vermont orchards primarily grow McIntosh apples, and the industry has seen a steady decline as consumer preferences have shifted to newer apple varieties. The number of acres devoted to apple growing decreased from approximately 3,700 in 1997 to just 1,700 in 2017, and many of the orchards now focus on growing apples for cider production and providing pick-your-own orchards to appeal to the state's agritourism market. 181. In 1999, apples and apple pie were named the official state fruit and state pie, respectively. 182. Around 23% of Vermont's vegetable farms are organic. Manufacturing. As of 2015, GlobalFoundries was the largest private employer in the state and provided jobs to 3,000 employees at its plant in the village of Essex Junction within Chittenden County. 183. A growing part of Vermont's economy is the manufacture and sale of artisan foods, fancy foods, and novelty items, trading in part upon the Vermont brand, which the state manages and defends. Examples of these specialty exports include Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Burton snowboards, Cabot cheese, Fine Paints of Europe, King Arthur flour, the Vermont Teddy Bear Company, Vermont Creamery, several microbreweries, and ginseng growers. In 2010, a University of Connecticut study reported that Vermont, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire tied as the most costly states in the U.S. for manufacturers. 184. Energize. Also list of power stations in Vermont. Vermont has no fossil fuel reserves. However, its forest products industry provides fuel for electricity generation and home heating. Electricity consumption per capita ranks it among the lowest 20% of states, and total electricity consumption was the lowest in the United States. Vermont consumed 3 times more electricity than it generated in state in 2019, and imported its largest share of electricity from Canada. Vermont's 99.9% share of electricity generation from renewable sources was the highest among all 50 states. 185. Health. See also Vermont Public Health. See also list of hospitals in Vermont. An increasingly aging population is expected to increase demand for aging-related services and healthcare. The University of Vermont Medical Center, with more than 8,800 employees, is the largest employer in the state. 186. In 2010, all of Vermont's hospitals billed patients $3.76 billion and collected $2 billion. 187. 92,000 people are enrolled in Medicare. In 2011, Medicare spent $740 million on health care in the state. 159. Labor. In 2009, the state attained a high of 361,290 workers. 188. As of 2006, there were 305,000 workers in Vermont. 11% of these are unionized. 189,190. Out of a workforce of 299,200 workers, 52,000 were government jobs, federal, state, and local. 191. A modern high unemployment rate of 9% was reached in June 1976. A modern low of 2.4% was measured in February 2000. 192. As of October 2019, the unemployment rate was 2.2. 193. Employment grew 7.5% from 2000 to 2006. From 1980 to 2000, employment grew by 3.4%. Nationally, it was up 4.6%. Real wages were $33,385 in 2006 constant dollars and remained there in 2010. The nation, $36,871. 194. As of 2014, the Pew Research Center estimated that farms in the state employed fewer than 5,000 illegal immigrants. 195. In 2017, Vermont Governor Phil Scott announced that the state was exploring a legal challenge to the executive order signed by President Donald Trump for Vermont law enforcement authorities to cooperate with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and perform the functions of immigration officers in relation to the investigation, apprehension, or detention of aliens. 196. Insurance insurance plays an increasingly large role in Vermont's economy. With this form of alternative insurance, large corporations or industry associations form standalone insurance companies to insure their own risks, thereby substantially reducing their insurance premiums and gaining a significant measure of control over types of risks to be covered. There are also significant tax advantages to be gained from the formation and operation of captive insurance companies. According to the Insurance Information Institute, Vermont in 2009 was the world's third largest domicile for captive insurance companies, following Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. 197. In 2009, there were 560 such companies. 198. In 2010, the state had 900 such companies. 199. Recreation Lake Champlain summer camps such as Camp Abnaki, Camp Billings, Camp Dudley, and Camp Hochelaga contribute to Vermont's tourist economy. In 2005, visitors made an estimated 13.4 million trips to the state, spending $1.57 billion. 200. In 2012, fall accounted for $460 million of income, about 1/4 of all tourism. 201. In 2011, the state government earned $274 million in taxes and fees from tourism. 89% of the money came from out-of-state visitors. Tourism supported over 26,000 jobs, 7.2% of total employment. 202. According to the 2000 census, almost 15% of all housing units in Vermont were vacant and classified for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. 203. Clarification needed. This was the second highest percentage nationwide, after Maine. In some Vermont cities, vacation homes owned by wealthy residents of New England and New York constitute the bulk of all housing stock. According to one estimate, as of 2009, 84% of all houses in Ludlow were owned by out-of-state residents. 204. Other notable vacation home resorts include Manchester and Stowe. Hunting. Autumn in Vermont. Hunting is controlled for black bear, wild turkeys, deer, and moose. 205. There are 5,500 bears in the state. The goal is to keep the numbers between 4,500 and 6,000. 206. In 2010, there were about 141,000 deer in the state, which is in range of government goals. However, these are distributed unevenly and when in excess of 10-15 per square mile for 6 km. 2. Reduced timber growth. 207. In 2012, hunting of migratory birds was limited to October 13 to December 16. Waterfowl hunting is also controlled by federal law. 208. Stowe Resort Village. Some of the largest ski areas in New England are located in Vermont. Skiers and snowboarders visit Burke Mountain Ski Area, Bolton Valley, Smuggler's Notch, Killington Ski Resort, Mad River Glen, Stowe Mountain Resort, Cochrane Ski Area, Sugarbush, Stratton, Jay Peak, Okemo, Saskadena 6, Mount Snow, Bromley, Brattleboro Ski Hill, and Magic Mountain Ski Area. Summer visitors tour resort towns like Stowe, Manchester, Quetchie, Wilmington, Woodstock, Mount Snow, and the effects of global warming have been predicted to shorten the length of the ski season across Vermont, which would continue the contraction and consolidation of the ski industry in Vermont and threaten individual ski businesses and communities that rely on ski tourism. 209. In winter, Nordic and backcountry skiers visit to travel the length of the state on the Catamount Trail. Several horse shows are annual events. Vermont's state parks, historic sites, museums, golf courses, and new boutique hotels with spas were designed to attract tourists. In 2000 to 2001, there were 4,579,719 skier and snowboarder visits to the state. There were 4,125,082 visits in 2009 to 2010, a rise from recent years. 210. In 2008, there were 35,000 members of 138 snowmobile. The combined association of clubs maintains 6,000 miles 9,700 km of trail, often over private lands. The industry is said to generate hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business. 211. Quarrying. The towns of Rutland and Barre are the traditional centers of marble and granite quarrying and carving in the U.S. For many years, Vermont was also the headquarters of the smallest union in the U.S., the Journeyman Stonecutters Association of North America, of about 500 members. The first marble quarry in America was on Mount Elis overlooking East Dorset, 212. The granite industry attracted numerous skilled stonecutters in the late 19th century from Italy, Scotland, and Ireland. Barry is the location of the Rock of Ages Quarry, the largest dimension stone granite quarry in the United States. Vermont is the largest producer of slate in the country. The highest quarrying revenues result from the production of dimension stone. Citation needed. The Rock of Ages Quarry in Barry is one of the leading exporters of granite in the country. The work of the sculptors of this corporation can be seen 3 miles 8 km down the road at the Hope Cemetery, where there are gravestones and mausoleums. Nonprofits and volunteerism. There were 2,682 nonprofit organizations in Vermont in 2008 with $2.8 billion in revenue. 213. The state ranked 9th in the country for volunteerism for the period August 2005. 35.6% of the population volunteered during this period. The national average was 26.4. Vermont was named the nation's smartest state in 2005 and 2006-15. In 2006, there was a gap between state testing standards and national, which is biased in favor of the state standards by 30% on average. This puts Vermont 11th best in the nation. Most states have a higher bias, 216. However, when allowance for race is considered, a 2007 U.S. government list of test scores shows Vermont white 4th graders perform 25th in the nation for reading 2-9 and 26th for math 2-7. 217 white 8th graders scored 18th for math 9-2 and 12th for reading 7-3. The first 3 scores were not considered statistically different from average. White 8th graders scored significantly above average in reading. Statistics for black students were not reliable because of their small representation in the testing. In 2017, spending $1.6 billion on education for 76,000 public school children represents more than $21,000 per student. 218 Education Week ranked the state second F in high school graduation rates for 2007. 219 in 2011, 91% of the population had graduated from high school compared with 85% nationally. Almost 34% have at least an undergraduate degree compared with 28% nationally. 220 in 2013, the ratio of pupils to teachers was the lowest in the country. 221 Higher Education Maine article, list of colleges and universities in Vermont. The University of Vermont's Old Mill, the oldest campus building. Vermont's largest university is the University of Vermont of M, a public land-grant research university and one of the original 8 public Ivies. In addition, Vermont State University and the Community College of Vermont reside within the Vermont State Colleges system. The state has several other private colleges, including Bennington College, Champlain College, Middlebury College, Norwich University, St. Michael's College, and Vermont Law and Graduate School. Research at the University of Vermont by George Perkins Marsh and the influence of Vermont-born philosopher and educator John Dewey brought about the concepts of electives and learning by doing. Transportation. Vermont Agency of Transportation VTrans is responsible for transportation infrastructure. The principal mode of travel in Vermont is via car, with 93.4% of Vermont households owning a car in 2021. 224 car ferry routes operate across Lake Champlain. Passenger rail is provided by Amtrak's Daily Vermonter and Ethan Allen Express trains. Intercity bus operators include Vermont Trans Lines, Greyhound Lines, and Megabus. A number of public transit agencies operate bus service at the local, county, and regional levels. Patrick Leahy Burlington International Airport is the state's primary airport. Vermont's license plate Road the West Dummerston Bridge, the longest covered bridge in Vermont. Vermont Route 17 in Addison with Snake Mountain at Wright. See also, list of state highways in Vermont. In 2012, there were 605,000 vehicles registered, nearly one for every person. This is similar to average car ownership nationwide, 223. In 2012, about half of greenhouse gas emissions in the state were from vehicles, 224. In 2010, Vermont owned 2,840 miles 4,570 km of highway. This was the third smallest quantity among the 50 states. 2.5% of the highways were listed as congested, the fifth lowest in the country. The highway fatality rate was 1 per 100 million miles, 160,000 km, 10th lowest in the nation. The highways cost $28,669 per mile, 17.81 for km to maintain, the 17th highest in the states. 34.4% of its 2,691-5 bridges were rated deficient or obsolete, the eighth worst in the nation, 2-6. A June 2005 study ranked Vermont 37th out of the states for cost-effective road maintenance, a decline of 13 places since 2004-05, 2-7. In 2007, Vermont was ranked the third safest state for highway fatalities, 2-8. One-third of these fatal crashes involved a drunken driver, 2-9. On average, 20 to 25 people die each year from drunk driving incidents, and 70 to 80 people are in fatal car crashes in the state. 230 collisions with moose constitute a traffic threat, particularly in northern Vermont, and cause several deaths per year. 231. In 2009, 93% of Vermont motorists were insured, tying with Pennsylvania for the highest percentage. 232. In 2008, Vermont was the fifth best state for fewest uninsured motorists at 6,233 trucks weighing less than 80,000 pounds. 36. Oak GG can use Vermont's interstate highways. The limit for state roads is 99,000 pounds. 45. Oak GG. This means that vehicles too heavy for the interstates can legally use only secondary roads. 234-235. In 1968, Vermont outlawed the use of billboards for advertisement along its roads. It is one of only 4 states in the U.S. to have done this, along with Hawaii, Maine, and Alaska, and is a source of pride among Vermonters. The consensus from the state's Act 250 Commission was that billboards obstruct and distract from scenic views of countryside, critical to Vermont's pastoral image. 236-37 major north-south routes. Interstate 89 runs a northwest-southeast path through Vermont, beginning in White River Junction and heading northwest to serve the cities of Montpelier, Burlington, and St. Albans en route to the Canada-U.S. border. I-89 intersects I-91 in White River Junction and has a short spur route, Interstate 189, just outside of Burlington. Interstate 91 runs a north-south path from the Massachusetts state line to the Canada-U.S. border, connecting the towns of Brattleboro, White River Junction, St. Johnsbury, and the city of Newport. I-91 intersects I-89 in White River Junction and I-93 in St. Johnsbury. Interstate 93 runs a short, 11-mile 18 km distance from the New Hampshire state line to its northern terminus in St. Johnsbury, where it intersects I-91. I-93 connects the Northeast Kingdom region of Vermont with the White Mountains region of New Hampshire and points south. U.S. Route 5 runs a north-south path in eastern Vermont from the Massachusetts state line to the Canada-U.S. border. U.S. Route 5 is a surface road that runs parallel to I-91 for its entire length in the state and serves nearly all the same towns. The two routes also parallel the New Hampshire state line between Brattleboro and St. Johnsbury. U.S. Route 7 runs a north-south path in western Vermont from the Massachusetts state line to the Canada-U.S. border. U.S. Route 7 connects the cities and towns of Bennington, Rutland, Middlebury, Burlington, and St. Albans. Between Bennington and Dorset, U.S. Route 7 runs as a super to freeway. It also parallels I-89 between Burlington and the Canada-U.S. border. Vermont Route 30 is a 111,870-mile-long north-south road that runs from Brattleboro to Middlebury. Vermont Route 30 runs through the state's historic West River Valley, where it passes through the colonial towns of Newfane, Townshend, West Townshend, East Jamaica, Rossonville, and Bonneville. Vermont Route 100 runs a north-south path directly through the center of the state, along the length of the Green Mountains. VT Route 100 generally parallels both U.S. Route 5, which runs to its east, and U.S. Route 7, which runs to its west. Many of the state's major ski areas are located either directly on, or very close to, VT Route 100. The largest town by population along VT Route 100 is Morristown. Major east-west routes. U.S. Route 2 runs a generally east-west path across central and northern Vermont, from Alberg on the New York state line to Guildhall on the New Hampshire state line. U.S. Route 2 connects the Lake Champlain Islands and the Northeast Kingdom to the population centers of Burlington, Montpelier, and St. Johnsbury. U.S. Route 2 runs parallel to I-89 between Colchester and Montpelier. Although the portion of the road from Alberg to Burlington follows a north-south orientation, U.S. Route 2 in Vermont is entirely signed as east-west. U.S. Route 4 runs east-west across south-central Vermont from Fairhaven on the New York state line to White River Junction on the New Hampshire state line. U.S. Route 4 also connects the city of Rutland and the towns of Killington and Woodstock. Between Fairhaven and Rutland, U.S. Route 4 runs as a 4-lane freeway that is mostly up to interstate design standards. U.S. Route 302 runs an east-west path from its western terminus in Montpelier to the village of Wells River, where it intersects both I-91 and U.S. Route 5, and then crosses into New Hampshire. U.S. Route 302 is one of the main roads connecting Montpelier and Barre in central Vermont. Vermont Route 9 runs an east-west path across the southern part of the state. VT Route 9 connects the towns of Bennington, Wilmington, and Brattleboro. Vermont Route 105 runs a generally east-west path across the northernmost parts of Vermont, sometimes within a few miles of the Canada-U.S. border from St. Albans to Bloomfield on the New Hampshire state line. VT Route 105 ultimately connects the cities of St. Albans and Newport. Fairith-Cumberland ice-breaking ferry headed toward Grand Isle. In winter there is a year-round ferry service to and from New York State across Lake Champlain from Charlotte to Essex and Grand Isle to Plattsburgh. Operated by the Lake Champlain Transportation Company, LC 238, the Grand Isle-Plattsburgh Ferry operates 24 hours a day, while the Charlotte Ferry serves a limited schedule. 239 seasonal service from Shoreham to Ticonderoga is provided by the Fort Ticonderoga Ferry. Railtheathan Allen Express alongside the Island Line Trail in Burlington. See also List of Vermont Railroads. Passenger service is provided by Amtrak's Vermonter and Ethan Allen Express, while freight service is provided by the New England Central Railroad, the Vermont Railway, and the Green Mountain Railroad. The Ethan Allen Express serves Burlington Union Station, Ferrisburgh, Vergennes, Middlebury, Rutland, and Castleton 240, while the Vermonter serves St. Albans, Essex Junction, Waterbury, Montpelier, Randolph, White River Junction, Windsor, Bellows Falls, and Brattleboro. 241 intercity bus Greyhound line stops in Bennington, Bellows Falls, Brandon, Burlington, Colchester, Ferrisburgh, Manchester, Middlebury, Montpelier, Rutland, Wallingford, and White River Junction. 242 Vermont Trans Lines, an intercity bus company founded by Premier Coach in 2013, partnering with Greyhound and starting service on June 9, 2014, serves Milton, Colchester, Burlington, Middlebury, Brandon, Rutland, Wallingford, Manchester, and Bennington. Additionally, Bennington hosts the weekday operating Albany-Bennington Shuttle, an intercity bus operated by Yankee Trails World Travel. 243 local busverts the bus in Rutland. See also List of bus operators in Vermont. A patchwork of transit providers operate local bus service in every Vermont county, though route frequency and coverage are often limited outside major cities. Many operators also provide paratransit and regional express bus services. Green Mountain Transit is the largest operator in the state, with weekday ridership of 7,300 as of the fourth quarter of 2024. 244 other major systems are Marble Valley Regional Transit District, the Bus, Southeast Vermont Transit Mover, Tri-Valley Transit, Rural Community Transportation, Advanced Transit, and Green Mountain Community Network. 245 Edward F. Knapp State Airport in Berlin. See also List of airports in Vermont. Patrick Leahy Burlington International Airport is the largest in the state, with regular flights to Atlanta, Charlotte, Chicago, Denver, Detroit, Washington, Dulles, JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, Orlando. Airlines serving the airport include American, Breeze, Delta, Sun Country, and United. 246 Beta Technologies operates an eVTOL manufacturing and testing facility at the airport. Additionally, the airport houses the 134th Fighter Squadron of the 158th Fighter Wing. Known as the Green Mountain Boys, the squadron is armed with the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II and is tasked with protecting the northeastern United States from the air. Rutland Southern Vermont Regional Airport has 3 daily flights to Boston via Cape Air. 247. Media Nuspers of record further information. List of newspapers in Vermont. Vermont statute requires the Vermont Secretary of State to designate newspapers that provide general coverage across the state as the newspapers of record. 248. As of 2019, these include 249 Addison Independent, Bennington Banner, Brattleboro, Reformer, Burlington Free Press, Caledonian Record, The Chronicle, Icelandern Tor, Daily Express News, and Citizen, Rutland Herald, 7 Days, Albans Messenger Times, Argus Valley News, Vermont Loweer, The White River Valley Herald Broadcast, and Web Media. Main articles, list of radio stations in Vermont and list of television stations in Vermont. Vermont hosts 93 radio broadcast stations. The top categories are Talk or Information 11, Country 9, and Classic Rock 9. The top owner of radio broadcast stations is Vermont Public Radio. 11 broadcast frequencies and 13 low-power, local transmitters. 250 other companies had 5 or fewer stations. The state has 15 online radio stations. 251 Vermont hosts 10 high-power television broadcast stations, 3 of which are satellites of a primary station. Represented are the following networks and number of high-power transmitters: ABC1, CBS1, Fox1, NBC2, PBS4, and RTV1. In addition, it has 17 low-power television broadcast stations, which in several cases are satellites of the high-power stations. The Rumble Strip podcast features conversations with everyday Vermonters and in 2021 won a Peabody Award to 5-2. Electrical Utilitiesman article, Energy in Vermont. The former Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant in Vernon, Vermont electric power needs are served by over 20 utilities. The largest is Green Mountain Power, a subsidiary of Nerger which also took over Central Vermont Public Service. Together this company represents 70% of the retail customers in Vermont. The state is a small electricity consumer compared with other states. Therefore, its electricity sector has the lowest carbon footprint in the country. As of 2010, the state had the lowest wholesale electricity costs in New England, to 5.3. Public health. In 2010, Vermont was the 6th highest ranked state for well-being in a study by Gallup and Healthways, to 5.4. In 2010, the state stood 3rd in physical well-being of children, 255. In 2010, Vermont was ranked the highest in the country for health outcomes, 256. In 2000, the state implemented the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program to improve preventive services and management of chronic conditions. In 2011, the state ranked 3rd in the nation in child health system performance, 257. In 2011, the March of Dimes gave Vermont an A, ranking it number 1 in the country on its prematurity report card, 258. The state scored well in cessation of smoking, obesity, fewer occupational fatalities, prevalence of health insurance, and low infant mortality. A problem area was a high prevalence of binge drinking, 259. While ranking 6th from best for adults in obesity in 2009, the state still had 22% obese with a rate of 27% for children 10-17. The ranking for children was 9th best in the nation, 260. In 1993, the obesity rate for adults was 12%. Vermonters spend $141 million annually in medical costs related to obesity, 261. The combined figures for overweight and obese adults rose from 40.7% in 1990 to 58.4% in 2010. This is better than most other states, 262. In 2011, Vermont led the nation in the rate of young people who had consumed alcohol in the past month, 1/3 of people aged 11 through 20. 1/5 of that group had binged during that time. The state was 2nd for the use of marijuana by young people, 30% of adults 18 to 25 in the past month, 263. In 2009, Vermont was ranked 2nd in the nation for safety. Crime statistics on violence were used for the criteria, 264. In 2007, Vermont was ranked among the best 5 states in the country for preventing premature death in people under 75 years of age. The rate of survival was twice that of the 5 lowest performing states, 265. Parts of the state have been declared federal disaster areas on 28 occasions from 1963 to 2008, 266. In 2007, the Environmental Protection Agency cited Chittenden and Bennington as counties with 70 parts per billion of smog, which is undesirable, 267. In 2008, about 100,000 Vermonters got their health care through the federal government, Medicare, TRICARE, and the Veterans Administration. An additional 10,000 Vermonters work for employers who provide insurance under federal law under ERISA. About 20% of Vermonters receive health care outside of Vermont. 20% of the care provided within the state is to non-Vermonters, 268. In 2008, the state had an estimated 7.6% with no medical insurance, down from 9.8% in 2005, 269. In 2008, the Vermont Health Access Program for low-income, uninsured adults cost from $7 to $49 per month, 270. A Catamount Health Premium Assistance Program was available for Vermonters who do not qualify for other programs. Total monthly premiums ranged from $60 to $393 for an individual. There was a $250 deductible. Insured paid $10 toward each generic prescription. 16.9% of residents 18 to 35 were uninsured. The highest group, 271 healthcare spending increased from $2.3 billion in 2000 to $4.8 billion in 2009 to 72. In 2009, adult day care services cost more in Vermont than any other state, 150. Daily, to 73. The state started airdrops of rabies bait for raccoons in 1997. Known rabies cases in raccoons peaked in 2007 at 165. The program is in cooperation with neighboring states and Canada. 274 Law and Government. Main article. Government of Vermont. The Vermont Supreme Court's building in Montpelier, Vermont, is federally represented in the United States Congress by 2 senators and 1 representative. The state is governed by a constitution which divides governmental duties into legislative, executive, and judicial branches: the Vermont General Assembly, the Governor of Vermont, and the Vermont Supreme Court. The governorship and the General Assembly serve 2-year terms, including the governor, 30 senators, and 150 representatives. There are no term limits for any office. The state capital is in Montpelier. There are 3 types of incorporated municipalities in Vermont: towns, cities, and villages. Like most of New England, there is slight provision for autonomous county government. Counties and county seats are merely convenient repositories for various government services such as state courts, with several elected officers such as a state's attorney and sheriff. All county services are directly funded by the state of Vermont. The next effective governmental level below state government are municipalities. Most of these are towns. 275 Finances and Taxation. Vermont is the only state in the Union not to have a balanced budget requirement, yet it has had a balanced budget every year since 1991-76. In 2007, Moody's gave its top bond credit rating AAA to the state. To 77, the state uses enterprise funds for operations that are similar to private business enterprises. The Vermont Lottery Commission, the Liquor Control Fund, and the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund are the largest of the state's enterprise funds. 278. Also in 2007, Vermont was the 14th highest out of 50 states and the District of Columbia for state and local taxation, with a per capita load of $3,681. The national average was 3,447. 279 Vermont collects a state personal income tax in a progressive structure of 5 different income brackets, with marginal tax rates ranging from 3.6% to 9.5%. In 2008, the top 1% of Vermont residents provided 30% of the income tax revenue. Around 2,000 people had sufficient income to be taxed at the highest marginal rate of 9.528. Vermont's general state sales tax rate is 6%, which is imposed on sales of tangible personal property, amusement charges, fabrication charges, some public utility charges, and some service contracts. Some towns and cities impose an additional 1% local option tax. There are 46 exemptions from the sales tax, including exemptions for food, medical items, manufacturing machinery, equipment and fuel, residential fuel and electricity, clothing, and shoes. A use tax is imposed on the buyer at the same rate as the sales tax. The buyer pays the use tax when the seller fails to collect the sales tax or the items are purchased from a source where no tax is collected. The use tax applies to items taxable under the sales tax. Vermont does not collect inheritance taxes, but does impose a state estate tax. A Vermont estate tax return must be filed if the estate must file a federal estate tax return, the requirement for which depends on federal law. 281 Vermont does not collect a gift tax. 282 Property taxes are levied by municipalities for the support of education and municipal services. Vermont does not assess tax on personal property. 283 Property taxes are based on appraisal of the fair market value of real property. 283 rates vary from 0.97% on homesteaded property in Ferdinand, Essex County, to 2.72% on non-residence property in Berry City. 284 statewide, towns average 1.77% to 1.82% tax rate. In 2007, Vermont counties were among the highest in the country for property taxes. Chittenden 3,809 median, Windham 3,412, Addison 3,352, and Windsor 3,3-7 ranked in the top 100 out of 1,817 counties in the nation with populations greater than 20,000. 12 of the state's 14 counties stood in the top 20. 285 median annual property taxes as a percentage of median homeowners' income, 5.4%, was rated as the 3rd highest in the nation in 2011-286G. To equitably support education, some towns are required by Act 60 to send some of their collected taxes to be redistributed to school districts lacking adequate support. 287 Main article, Politics of Vermont. See also, Political party strength in Vermont and United States congressional delegations from Vermont. Vermont is one of 4 states, Texas, California, and Hawaii, that previously claimed status as independent nations. Vermont is the only state to have voted for a presidential candidate from the anti-Masonic Party, and Vermont was one of only 2 states to vote against Franklin D. Roosevelt in all 4 of his presidential campaigns. The other was Maine. Vermont's history of independent political thought has led to movements for the establishment of the Second Vermont Republic and other plans advocating secession. Vermont is the only state in the United States that requires voters to be sworn in, having established the voter's oath or affirmation in 1777-288. All white men were granted universal suffrage in 1777-289. State politics. Vermont towns hold a March town meeting for voters to approve the town's budget and decide other matters. Marlborough voters meet in this building. Republicans dominated local Vermont politics from the party's founding in 1854 until the mid-1970s and at the presidential level until the 1990s. Before the 1960s, rural interests dominated the legislature. As a result, cities, particularly the older sections of Burlington and Winooski, were neglected and fell into decay, and people began to move out to newer suburbs. A series of one-man, one-vote decisions made by the United States Supreme Court in the 1960s required states to redraw their legislative districts to accurately reflect population. As a result, urban areas in Vermont gained political power. The legislature was redistricted under one person, one vote in the 1960s. It passed the Land Use and Development Law Act 250 in 1970 to discourage suburban sprawl and to limit major growth to already developed areas. The law, the first of its kind in the nation, created 9 district environmental commissions appointed by the governor, who judged land development and subdivision plans that would affect the state's environment and many small communities significantly. As a result of Act 250, Vermont was the last state to get a Walmart. There are now 6 Walmarts in the state as of November 2017, but only 3 in Williston, St. Albans, and Derby were newly built from the ground up. Because of the successful attempts to dilute what is perceived as the original intent of Act 250-290 and other development pressures, Vermont has been designated one of America's most endangered historic places by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. 291 from 1856, the first presidential election after the Republican Party's founding to 1988, Vermont voted Republican in every presidential election except 1964, when Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson became the first of his party to carry the state amidst a national landslide. Since 1992, Vermont has voted Democratic in every presidential election, marking a massive shift in the state's politics. 292-93-94-95 in 1995, the state banned the spreading of manure from December 15 to April 1 to prevent runoff and protect the water. Therefore, farms must have environmentally approved facilities to store manure during this time frame. To 96, while the state voted largely Democratic, Republican Governor Douglas won all counties but Windham in the 2006 election. A controversy dating from 1999 has been over the adoption of civil unions, an institution which grants same-sex couples nearly all the rights and privileges of marriage at the state, but not federal, level. In Baker v. Vermont 1999, the Vermont Supreme Court ruled that under the Constitution of Vermont, the state must either allow same-sex marriage or provide a separate but equal status for them. The state legislature chose the second option. By creating the institution of civil union, the bill was passed by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Howard Dean. In April 2009, the state legislature overrode Governor Jim Douglas's veto to allow same-sex marriage, becoming the first state in the nation to legalize same-sex marriage through legislation. 297. In September 2009, Vermont became the 4th state in which same-sex couples could marry. The previous 3 were Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Iowa. In 2007, the state's House of Representatives rejected a measure which would have legalized assisted suicide for the terminally ill by a vote of 80 to 63. With the governor's signature on May 20, 2013, Vermont became the 4th state to pass a death with dignity law, the first to be passed through legislation, rather than by ballot initiative. 298 Minor parties and independents flourish. Rules which eliminate smaller parties from the ballot in most states do not exist in Vermont. As a result, voters often have extensive choices for general elections. Among others, this more open policy enabled independents like Bernie Sanders to win election as mayor of Burlington, as a U.S. congressman, and as a U.S. senator. A political issue has been Act 60, which balances taxation for education funding. This has resulted in the town of Killington trying to secede from Vermont and join New Hampshire, due to what the locals say is an unfair tax burden, to 99300 the Vermont Constitution, and the court supports the right of a person to walk, fish, and hunt on any unposted, unfenced land. That is, trespass must be proven by the owner. It is not automatically assumed. 301 Vermont has some of the least restrictive gun control laws in the country. A permit or license is not required for purchasing or carrying firearms. Concealed carry and open carry of a firearm is legal over the age of 16, with those below 16 requiring parental permission. 302-303-304-305 Vermont has a pro-sanctuary city law. 306. The state is an alcoholic beverage control state. In 2007, through the Vermont Department of Liquor Control, it took in over $14 million from the sale and distribution of liquor. 307. In 2013, Vermont became the 17th state to decriminalize marijuana. The statute makes possession of less than an ounce of the drug punishable by a small fine, rather than arrest and possible jail time. 308. In 2014, Vermont became the first state to call for a constitutional convention to overturn the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United v. Feck. 309. In 2014, Vermont became the first state to mandate labeling of genetically modified organisms in the retail food supply. A distinctive law of Vermont is public nudity. 310. The state's legislation calls for nudity in public to be a constitutional right of Vermonters, so long as lewd and lascivious acts are not performed in public view. 311. And that the nudist does not undress in the presence of others. One reason this law was implemented is to protect skinny dippers who frequent swimming holes, a longtime tradition in the state. There are other restrictions and bylaws on the municipal level concerning problematic nudity, but walking in the nude is legally protected in all 251 towns and cities in Vermont. 312. In January 2018, Governor Phil Scott opted to sign H. 511, the Vermont Marijuana Legalization Bill, which allows adults 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana and grow up to 2 mature plants starting July 1, 2018. 313. Federal politics. Also, United States presidential elections in Vermont. 3 older men on a stage next to an American flag. Senators Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy and Representative Peter Welch greet supporters in 2017. Historically, Vermont was considered one of the most reliably Republican states in the country in terms of national elections. From 1856 to 1988, Vermont voted Democratic only once, in Lyndon B. Johnson's landslide victory of 1964 against Barry M. Goldwater. It was also one of only 2 states, Maine is the other, where Franklin D. Roosevelt was completely shut out in all 4 of his presidential bids. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Republican presidential candidates frequently won the state with over 70% of the vote. In the 1960s and 1972, many people moved in from out of state. 314, 315, 316. Much of this immigration included the arrival of more liberal political influences of the urban areas of New York and the rest of New England in Vermont. 315. The brand of republicanism in Vermont has historically been a moderate one, and combined with the newcomers from out of state, this made Vermont friendlier to Democrats as the national GOP moved to the right. As evidence of this, in 1990 Bernie Sanders, a self-described Democratic socialist, was elected to Vermont's lone seat in the House as an independent. Sanders became the state's junior senator in 2007. However, for his entire career in the House and Senate, Sanders has caucused with the Democrats and is counted as a Democrat for the purposes of committee assignments and voting for party leadership. 317. After narrowly supporting George H.W. Bush in 1988, it gave Democrat Bill Clinton a 16-point margin in 1992, the first time the state had gone Democratic since 1964. Vermont has voted Democratic in every presidential election since. Since 2004, Vermont has been one of the Democrats' most loyal states. It gave John Kerry his 4th largest margin of victory in the presidential campaign against George W. Bush. He won the state's popular vote by 20 percentage points, taking almost 59% of the vote. Kerry, from neighboring Massachusetts, also became the first Northern Democrat ever to carry Vermont. Johnson was from Texas, Clinton from Arkansas, and Al Gore, triumphant in Vermont in 2000, from Tennessee. Essex County in the state's northeastern section was the only county to vote for Bush. Vermont is the only state that did not receive a visit from George W. Bush during his tenure as President of the United States. 318. Indeed, George W. Bush and Donald Trump are the only Republicans to win the White House without carrying Vermont. In 2008, Vermont gave Barack Obama his third-largest margin of victory, 37 percentage points, and third-largest vote share in the nation by his winning the state 68% to 31%. Only Obama's birth state of Hawaii and Washington, D.C. were stronger Democratic victories. The same held true in 2012, when Obama carried Vermont 67% of the vote to 31% for Mitt Romney, and in 2016, when Hillary Clinton won with 57% of the vote to 30% for Donald Trump. Vermont's two senators are Independent Bernie Sanders and Democrat Peter Welch. The state is represented by an at-large member of the House, Democrat Becca Bolland, who succeeded Welch in 2023. Culture of Ermintarge's sculpture in Post Mills. In 2010 Vermont festivals include the Vermont Maple Festival, Festival on the Green, 319. The Vermont Dairy Festival in Osberg Falls, 320. The Apple Festival held each Columbus Day weekend, the Marlborough Music Festival, the Guilford Country Fair, and the Vermont Brewers Festival, 3-1. The Vermont Symphony Orchestra is supported by the state and performs throughout the area. Since 1973, the Sage City Symphony, formed by composer Louis Calabro, has performed in the Bennington area. In 1988, a number of Vermont-based composers, including Gwyneth Walker, formed the Vermont Composers Consortium, 3-3, which was recognized by the governor, proclaiming 2011 as the Year of the Composer. 3-4. Burlington, Vermont's largest city, hosts the annual Vermont International Film Festival, which presents 10 days in October of independent films. 3-5. The Brattleboro-based Vermont Theater Company presents an annual Summer Shakespeare Festival. Brattleboro also hosts the summertime strolling of the Heifers Parade, which celebrates Vermont's dairy culture. The annual Green Mountain Film Festival is held in Montpelier, 3-6. In the Northeast Kingdom, the Bread and Puppet Theater holds weekly shows in Glover in a natural outdoor amphitheater. 3-7. One of Vermont's best-known musical acts is the rock band Fish, whose members met while attending school in Vermont and spent much of their early years playing at venues across the state. 3-8. 3-9. The Vermont-based House of Lemme, 330, performs several shows a year, hosts the annual Winter is a Drag Ball, 331, and performs for fundraisers. Examples of folk art found in Vermont include the Vermontosaurus in Post Mills, a community in Thetford. 332. The rate of volunteerism in Vermont was 8th in the nation with 37% in 2007. The state stood first in New England. 333. In 2011, Vermont residents were ranked as the healthiest in the country. 334. Winter sports are popular in New England, and Vermont's winter sports attractions are a big part of Vermont tourism. Some well-known attractions include Burke Mountain Ski Area, Jay Peak Resort, Killington Ski Resort, Stowe Mountain Resort, the Quetchi Club Ski Area, and Smuggler's Notch Resort. Vermont natives in the snowboarding profession include Kevin Pierce, Ross Powers, Hannah Teeter, and Kelly Clark. Others learned snowboarding in the state, such as Louis Vito and Ellery Hollingsworth. Vermont Olympic gold medalists include Barbara Cochran, 335. Hannah Kearney, 336. Kelly Clark, 337. Ross Powers, 338. And Hannah Teeter, 339. Baseball. The largest professional franchise is the Vermont Lake Monsters of the Futures Collegiate Baseball League, based in Burlington. They were named the Vermont Expos before 2006, 340. Up until the 2011 season, they were the affiliate of the Washington Nationals, formerly the Montreal Expos. Up until 2020, they played in the New York Penn League of Single A and were the single affiliate of the Oakland Athletics basketball. The highest-ranked teams in basketball representing Vermont are the NCAA's Vermont Catamounts, male and female. 3-1. The Vermont Frost Heaves, the 2007 and 2008 American Basketball Association national champions, were a franchise of the Premier Basketball League and were based in Barrie and Burlington from the fall of 2006 through the winter of 2011. Football. Vermont Bucks, an indoor football team, were based in Burlington and began play in 2017 as the founding team in the Can-Am Indoor Football League. 3-2. For 2018, the Bucks joined the American Arena League, but folded prior to playing in the new league. 3-3. The University of Vermont abolished its intercollegiate football team, the Vermont Catamounts, in 1974. Hockey. Vermont is home to the University of Vermont men's and women's hockey teams. Vermont's only professional hockey team was the Vermont Wild, who played in the Federal Hockey League during the December 2011 season, but the team folded before the season ended. 3-4. Secure. Vermont Voltage were a usual Premier Development League soccer club that played in Stede Albans. Vermont Green FC are a usual League Two club that will play at University of Vermont's Virtue Field in Burlington, 3-4-5-3-4-6 annually since 2002. High school statewide All-Stars compete against New Hampshire in 10 sports during Twin State playoffs. 3-for-7 Motorsport. Vermont also has a few auto racing venues. The most popular of them is Thunder Road International Speed Bowl in Barre, Vermont. It is well known for its tight racing and has become well known in short-track stock car racing. Other racing circuits include the USC-sanctioned Bear Ridge Speedway and the NASCAR-sanctioned Devil's Bowl Speedway. Some NASCAR Cup drivers have come to Vermont circuits to compete against local weekly drivers such as Tony Stewart, Clint Bowyer, Kyle Busch, Kenny Wallace, Ken Schrader, 3-for-8, and Christopher Bell, 3-for-9. Kevin Lepage from Shelburne, Vermont is one of a few professional drivers from Vermont. Racing series in Vermont include NASCAR Wellen All-American Series, American Canadian Tour, and Vermont's own Tiger Sportsman Series. Other rugby union is represented at the collegiate level and adult club level with 5 men's sides and 1 women's side. All compete in the NERFU Conference, and some have won national championships.